Skinner is probably the most famous and influential psychologist in the English-speaking world today. He's considered the dean of all behavior. Behaviorism is a very particular view of the social nature of man, since it has influenced so many people in so many fields. We thought it would be helpful to listen to Dr. Skinner himself talking about this fact as part of this opening hour of The Mass and the Single Will. Freelance broadcaster Richard Lubbock flew to Boston to interview Dr. Skinner, and here's their conversation.
You are writing in preparing a book, you told me, on freedom and human dignity. Can you give me a brief outline of what you're proposing to say in this book?
Well, I'm looking at those concepts from a scientific point of view. They are, I think, causing trouble. After all, a science of behavior tries to make a basic assumption that man is not truly free. And if you look at the historical concept, it is usually concerned with freedom from punitive or aversive control, and I'm all for that, as everyone else is. You can analyze that as a kind of behavioral process, if you like. It does not extend to freedom which is involved when we do what we want to do. Voltaire said, well, now I can do what I want, there is my freedom. But then he also said, I can't help wanting what I want. And science of behavior is naturally concerned with why people want to do what they want to do. And when you look at that, you find that although they feel free and they're doing what they want, they weren't really free to want it. And if you thoroughly examine the circumstances under which people behave, you find there is no true freedom. Now, many people regard that as a terrible threat because they've struggled for freedom for so many centuries, and they've been so much concerned with the kinds of controls they are trying to break free from that they naturally assume that if they're not free, they'll be in for trouble. But actually, we are all controlled all the time. The thing is to try to work out ways in which we can be controlled for our own good and the good of others, rather than for the despoiling control of some selfish controller. Same thing is true of the concept of dignity. That isn't an awfully good word. What I have in mind is the worth of a man, what he should be given credit for. We like to believe that when a man achieves something, he deserves credit. However, if you make a careful study, you'll find that part of it is due to his genetic endowment. He has a certain intelligence and certain skills and so on. And the rest is probably due to his environmental history, the education he's had, the family contacts he's had, his religion, government, and so on. So that when you get right down to it, the man himself doesn't deserve any credit. So that in a sense, no one deserves credit. And we resent that. We resent, in general, we resent people who deprive us of the credit due us. And it seems as if a science of behavior were doing that. And the technology of behavior also deprives us of being admired for what we're doing. Well, that again I think can be resolved. We give people credit to induce them to do things, which are a form of reinforcement, as we call it. And we will go right on doing that. We will find ways of inducing the individual to behave in admirable and creditable ways.
In your book, Walden 2, you devote a certain amount of attention to the notion, love thy enemy. To many people, this would seem to be an impractical proposition. Can you suggest, for example, how it might conceivably be put into effect in some of the situations which face not only the United States, but the whole world today?
Well, I use that essentially biblical point to exemplify a shift from the traditional punitive practices that men have always used because they're so quick and easy. If you're you're bigger than the other fellow, you knock him down, he'll stop doing what he's been doing. A shift to the use of what we call positive reinforcement, which a character in the book identifies with love, doing good to people rather than doing harm. And I suggested there, rather sarcastically, I suppose, that this was the essence of the Christian revolution, that Christ discovered that by doing good, he had greater power over people than doing harm. And if you tend to be a power-mad person, perhaps you ought to consider the possibility of what you can do by loving people instead of harming them. And I think this is the point that, for example, with a family with children, it's very easy to tell children to shut up and to slap them when they misbehave and that kind of thing. It's quick, easy, it's almost instinctive, and it achieves some kind of solution to a group of people living together and their problems. But in the long run, there are disastrous side effects from that. But the alternative, which is to use positive support, to do nice things, requires so much skill and so easy to misuse. You just start being nice to your children, before you know it, they're showing off for attention, they're begging for love, and all sorts of things go wrong. It's much more difficult to use positive reinforcement skillfully than to use punishment. It doesn't come natural. It takes some training. I've seen parents spoil children in a great effort to be nice to them. Permissiveness is an effort not to punish, so you just let them do as they please, and the first thing you know, they're in real trouble. The alternatives to punishment are the things we must learn, and they happen to be the things which scientific study of behavior is now pointing up quite clearly. That requires a lot of behavioral engineering. That may come in time.
You use this term behavioral engineering, and it's an expression which a lot of people shy away from. Do you think it's good behavioral engineering to use the term?
I tended, I think, to adopt the policy of rubbing people's noses in the facts in order to bring about change. I could call it something else, but that's what it really is. I had the same problem with the teaching machine. Oh, don't call it teaching machines. The machine, that's the wrong word. But you have a sewing machine to sew and a washing machine to wash, and the teaching machine teaches. And why not call it that and get people over the hurdle until they can begin to examine the situation and act upon it? We do manipulate human behavior all the time. We've done so from the beginning of recorded history. It's been pre-scientific and hence not truly engineering. But once you have a science of behavior, then the pre-scientific rule of thumb becomes a scientific technology. And if you try to cover up with weasel words, then you simply delay the process.
So you're saying then that society, that the system manipulates the individual willy-nilly, and that really the only thing we can do is to arrange things so that aversive manipulation is minimized. Is that?
I would say yes. Now, there are questions as to whether the human organism can get along entirely without some aversive control. The human body has survived under conditions which are primarily aversive. Men have lived to not only to get food and to breed, but to avoid all sorts of dangers and dangerous and hazardous environments. And it may very well be that if you arrange a world in which there is never any danger, never any threat of any kind, that we would all go desperately bored or something of that kind. We can't be sure of this. It's an empirical question. However, in general, we do move away from that kind of control. We try to make the world safe. We try to make the world free of boring people, of punitive people, of aggressive people, and so on, all in an effort to escape from undesirable conditions of one kind or another. And I myself believe that we have not even begun to explore the extent to which the human organism does respond to positive reinforcements. We can do marvelous things raising children that we're not even starting to do yet. Marvelous things in education and psychotherapy. We're already making some very extensive practical changes in the control of people, the management of people, for their good as well as the good of the controller.
In this connection, of course, the penal treatment of criminals comes to mind at once. What sort of improvement, what direction of improvement do you think can be made at the present stage of knowledge?
Well, I think we could already move, even in daily life, from punitive to positive techniques to some extent. However, for institutionalized, incarcerated criminals, a great deal has already been done to turn to positive control rather than the usual negative control of guards and bars and all of that sort of thing. The most promising experiment, I think, was done in Washington, D.C. at a national training school for delinquent boys. The behavioral scientists from the Institute of Behavioral Research took over one of the buildings at that school and changed it completely. It was, at that time, a perfectly ordinary example of the Borstal situation where boys are disgruntled, they do what they have to do and wait for the day when they can get out. They took a building and revised the structure of the society in it completely. If a boy did not want to do anything, he didn't need to. But he could sleep on a pad in the dormitory at night. He could get a nutritious but not very interesting diet, and he could sit around all day. No one forced him to do anything. But if he wanted to earn points, he could greatly improve his situation. He could buy better food, he could rent a private room, he could buy access to a game room, a pool table, or outdoor sports space, and that kind of thing. He could earn a few points by doing some janitorial services, working in the kitchen, but the main way to get points was to learn something. They had programmed instruction, teaching devices of one kind or another, and by learning to read and write, many of these had been abandoned by the school system. They were not educated at all. By learning to read, write, do arithmetic, and things of that kind, you could earn a very fine living. And you'd even buy time off and take a day off on the town at so many points. And this had an enormous effect on the morale. The boys become interested in what they're doing. Of course, they begin to make comparisons, invidious comparisons among themselves. The brighter ones become outright capitalists, and so on. It's not an unnatural situation by any means. Now, that was done about 3 years ago. The boys there, some of them were under this system for as little as 3 months, some of them as much as a year. They've been out over 3 years now, and follow-up studies have shown that those who have got into trouble again are about half what you would have expected from the record of the school as a whole and such institutions as a whole. Now, this is an enormous change, and although the program costs a bit of money to administer, you save it over again the very first year because of the fewer of these boys who have to take care of it on another assignment, you see.
It would seem from what you said earlier that it's in principle possible for a government to arrive at a technique whereby a government could control the behavior of its entire population. Is this possible, and to what extent would it be dangerous, and how could we avoid it?
Well, you seem to be implying that such a government would not be benevolent and would somehow or other misuse its power. At the moment, we seem to be saved from despotism because the government is too inept and doesn't have the technology. It makes an effort to do so. In fact, the government is involved in every aspect of the control of behavior. Now, the fact that it's not doing it well doesn't seem to me to be a virtue. Whether it would misuse it if it were doing it, its power, if it were doing it better, if it were more powerful, is a question, of course. I don't think the the worry is about the extent of the power. It's how it is to be used and how the culture is to be designed in such a way that everyone profits from effective social relations.
I think what a lot of people fear about a super effective behavior technology is the loss of their freedom, the loss of their ability to realize themselves and to develop whatever it is they have to develop to its fullest extent. I think they feel that they would be confined to certain set standards and values.
Well, of course, they are confined to standards and values. The standards and values of Canada, for example, are very different from those of, say, Arabia. And that isn't a question of personal choice. It's not that the Canadians all chose their set and that the Arabians all chose theirs. These are two different cultures with very long histories. And the cultures exert influences on the people born under them. It has an effect on the language they speak, on how they deal with each other, on their economic systems, on their marital arrangements and whatnot. And these are not voluntary decisions on the part of either one of them to do it this way against that. It's the way culture has evolved. There are questions of values which I think are extremely important. I think they can be answered by a science of behavior, just like any other question involving human behavior. But they're not answered by giving the individual freedom. He doesn't have that freedom. He can't start from scratch. He starts as a baby. And by the time he's making these free decisions you talk about, he's been enormously molded by his family, his religion, his government, his educational system, his peers, his street gangs, and whatnot. Then he said, now I'm going to be an individual, beginning at this moment, bang, from now on I decide that I'm in favor of X. Well, there's no possibility that can be a free choice.
Well, the Canadian, for instance, might say at the age of 21 that he's going to become a Muslim, or he's going to become a Buddhist, or he's going to live in the forest, or something like that. He wants to feel that he's free to do this. Wouldn't a perfect science of behavior deprive him of this freedom? I think this is the feeling people have.
Supposing he does say that, supposing a Canadian suddenly says, I'm going to become a Muslim, what are the chances of his doing that without having been enormously influenced by Muslim literature or some contact with Muslim cultures or something of that kind? They're infinitesimal. He's going to do that only when he's had certain influences acting upon him. He doesn't suddenly say, I'm going to become a Hottentot, because nobody has been selling the literature of the Hottentots. No one has been out talking about the superior advantages of an Eastern or some kind of Hottentot culture, you see. So that he could never make that statement as a free statement in the first place. Now, if, however, he has been exposed to an alternative culture and does make a choice, literally makes a choice in the sense that he might make a choice between going to one movie against another, he may seem to be free, and he certainly would object if someone said, no, you've got to go to that movie and not the other. You've got to remain a Christian and not become a Muslim. And that's the kind of control that we do all object to, and we are more or less freeing ourselves from. But we're not truly free. The movie we choose, the decision may be trivial, but it will be real. And so the decision to change cultures will be due to trivial but real variables.
To what extent do you think the culture is important, and to what extent do you think the individual is important? We feel as individuals, of course, that the culture is there to help us grow, but the culture makes demands on us too. The whole Western tradition really is that the individual is important. How do you feel that this appears in the light of a science of behavior?
Well, if you identify a culture with a state so that it becomes a question of whether it's the individual or the state, then that's an artificial way of putting it. The state is a nominous concept. It suggests commissars and so on. But if you mean the totality of the culture in which a man lives, then I think you have to assert that that is the major force, it's the major goal, it's the kind of thing which is happening we ought to examine, is not the birth, life, and death of each individual, but the culture to which he is somehow or other contributing, or perhaps from which he's detracting. I think it is a reasonable view of what has happened to point to the evolution of the human species with its evolving characteristics. We have eyes and ears because of the importance to the species that they have a certain sensitivity. We have the capacity to be reinforced by sweets and nutritious food, by sexual contact, by probably aggressive triumph over animals and whatnot. These are all characteristics of the human organism which can be traced to the contingencies of survival over hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Given man as we know him, presumably as he has existed for the last, say, 25,000 years, we then have that genetic endowment permitting man to evolve, to produce a culture. He discovers ways of getting along with other people, of transmitting what he learns about the world so that it's useful to others, and then you get a kind of evolution of cultures which in many respects is something like the evolution of species. As one culture follows one line and is or is not successful because of what it does, another culture follows another line. We have had cultures which have gone in strongly for religious mysticism, other cultures which have gone in for hard-headed economic trade, others which have gone in for scientific activities. Most of them are blends of all of these in different proportions. Now, our culture has gone steadily in the direction of scientific knowledge and the development of technologies which permit us to control the world. It seems to be getting out of control, but that's thoughtlessness rather than a lack of power on our part. Whether or not we've made some egregious error and have not developed the science of behavior we need in time to offset the disadvantages of the other technologies we've developed is a moot point, I think, at the present time. I don't see how we can decide that. Time will decide it, however. Now, the individual is born into the culture. He is unique, there's no question about that. His fingerprints are unique enough to be used by the police, but every cell in his body is just as different from everyone else's cells. And he has his share of the endowment of the human species and all of the individual properties from his family as a special subdivision of a species. He then gets modified by the way in which his parents take care of him, by the brothers and sisters with whom he lives, by the teachers in the schools he goes to, by religious training, by governmental authority, and so on. An enormous individuality in there because every single personal history is unique also. So you've got a person, and he has been taught by his culture that he is a person, and he already has built into him some selfish interests, and he acquires from his culture a concern for others, possibly a rather crude one of not harming other people, but possibly a very genuine interest in doing good for mankind in general. That would presumably be a feature of a very good culture. If a culture can convince its members that the culture is worth working for, then the culture is strengthened. But that is done usually in ways which will falter. At the present time, certainly in America, I think we see a return to very selfish, very immediate personal reinforcers, instant happiness, and down with helping others. Why should I care? Why should I bathe? I don't smell myself. Why should I care whether others smell me? Why should I work if I can get something to eat and a place to live without working. This whole, why should I enter into an economic system that will try to make an eager beaver out of me by certain schedules of payment or wages? Why should I fight for my country? And so on. The culture has failed to put across the kinds of behaviors which work for the good of the culture at the present time. And individualism is opposed really to a strong culture. And the great liberals, the great humanists who talk about the individual as the ultimate goal are, I think, just as bad as the hippie who drops out of society and goes off and gets the personal reinforcers he can find wherever he can find them. Both of these people are turning against the culture as the ultimate good. Yet I think it's going to be that, because even if our culture flounders now, some other culture is going to inspire its members with an extraordinary energy working for the strength of the culture. I'm not at all sure that China may not be that culture at the present time. They don't, as far as I know, go in for instant happiness. In fact, one of the first steps in communist China was to suffer a bit, to sleep on the floor instead of sleeping on a mattress, to harden oneself for the good of the country. And that's a kind of thing we've not seen much of in this country for a long time.
Psychologist B.F. Skinner of Harvard University, explaining his science of behavior and his behavioral engineering to Richard Lubbock. And that's an initial look at some theories of the mass and the single will.